I hope eventually that she is somehow moved by the same thing that I was moved in by church. Yeah, I honestly do wish that, because I believe in the Christian gospel, and I hope eventually my wife comes to see it the same way. But if she doesn't, then God says everybody has free will, and so that doesn't cause a problem for me. That's something you work out with your friends, with your family, with the person that you love. Again, one of the most important Christian principles is that you respect free will. Usha's closer to the priests who baptized me than maybe I am. They talk about this stuff. My attitude is you figure this stuff out as a family, and you trust in God to have a plan, and you try to follow it as best as you can. And that's what I try to do. I want to make a final point. So I don't want to cut you off. I want to be respectful to all the people behind you in line. But I want to make this point about immigration, okay? If you ask the question, what is the exact right number of immigrants for the United States to let in, it is just very specific on the context. If you go back to the 1920s, the United States passed an Immigration Reform Act that effectively cut down immigration to close to zero for 40 years in this country. And what happened over those 40 years? The many, many people who had come from many different foreign countries and different foreign cultures, they assimilated into American culture. And there was an expectation that they would assimilate into American culture. I think we have two problems in our immigration system today. And my guess is you're probably a slightly more leftist political persuasion, liberal political persuasion, maybe not. But here's the thing. I remember back in my establishment GOP days, when I was still very early getting involved in Republican politics, I remember a conservative think tank person who told me that one of the reasons why immigration was really good is that if you had enough diversity in a country, people would mistrust each other and they wouldn't join labor unions. Okay? So when I see a lot of left-wing people who theoretically support organized labor saying we need to flood the country with a limitless number of immigrants, they're unwilling to set any limitations on it. My response to that is you are destroying the very social trust on which American freedom and prosperity was built. And that is really important to me. So the honest answer to your question, what is the exact number of immigrants America should accept in the future? Right now, the answer is far less than we've been accepting. We have got to become a common community again, and you can't do that when you have such high numbers of immigration, which is one of the reasons why we have the immigration policy we do. Thank you. Next.
Good evening, Vice President Vance. I just want to say it's an honor to actually be able to talk to you.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. One of my biggest questions is, I feel like one of the biggest problems that America is facing today is that ever-growing social political divide, and we're seeing this on the Republican and Democratic side, but we've seen that a refusal to cooperate with the other side has led to some major issues, including right now the government shutdown. And I wonder, as the party in power, what are your plans to address that issue towards, reaching that olive branch out to the other side to actually come to an agreement on how to go forward with our government?
Look, it's a very good question, and let me just say on the government shutdown in particular, the reality here is that there's a very simple bill that just reopens the government. It does it through pretty much the end of the year. That got every single Republican in the House of Representatives to support it. And then it got 52 Republicans in the Senate and 3 Democrats in the Senate to support it. But because of weird Senate procedural rules, it requires a 60-vote threshold. So on that issue in particular, when you have every single Republican with like 2 exceptions in both houses of Congress, I feel pretty confident. I know that I'm partisan. I know I have an R next to my name. But I feel pretty damn good saying the shutdown is the Democrats' fault because we voted again and again to open it. Now, but there's a broader question there, and I think most Americans, whatever their political persuasion, would actually like the country's political parties to work together better to solve the problems. And look, and I agree with that. And my approach when I was in the United States Senate was to try to find some issues where we could agree with the other side on and try to work with them on it. And let me give you one example. I really worry about concentration in the corporate sector. I worry about big corporate monopolies. I worry that when you have only one or two companies dominating an entire sector, it's bad for liberty and it's bad for prosperity. So you may be shocked to hear this, but I actually worked with Elizabeth Warren on some anti-monopoly stuff when I was in the United States Senate. But here's the problem. The problem is there is actually a lot of things where we could work across the aisle. There are a lot of President Trump is in my view, you haven't seen organized labor ever get behind a Republican at least in 100 years like they have behind Donald J. Trump. There are a lot of areas of common ground on that question. The problem is, as reasonable as some of these people can be in private, in public, the current obsession of the Democratic Party in leadership, I'm not saying every Democrat in the country, but the current obsession of every Democrat in Congress is get President Trump, fight President Trump, attack President Trump. It is impossible for us to work across the aisle unless a person is willing to put down their partisan sword, shut the hell up about fake scandals related to Donald Trump, and actually work with us. That's the way you make this happen. Next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next. I'm going to try to get through as many as possible, guys. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Vice President.
Hello.
Hi. I actually drove here all the way from Memphis, Tennessee. Go Tigers. So I'm sure everyone here is aware of the Memphis Safe Task Force that has been in the city for about a month now, and I checked a little earlier. As of this morning, I believe they've arrested 1,700 people and seized about 300 illegal guns. So I want to ask, how does this law enforcement objective jive with Attorney General Pam Bondi's pledge to make the Department of Justice a more pro-Second Amendment Department of Justice? Because I'm sure most people in here support the Second Amendment. So how can Republicans and this Department of Justice use the current gun laws that are on the books that a lot of pro-Second Amendment advocates disagree with, that we wanted to overturn in the big, beautiful bill, but we didn't get it?
Yeah. So I understand the question. And by the way, I supported some of those changes in the big, beautiful bill. I know the President of the United States did too. We didn't have the votes to get them in there, and that's as simple as that. But I know exactly what you're talking about because there were a couple of issues in particular. I talked to some of my Second Amendment friends. But here's the basic issue. We don't want people who have violated the law, who have committed felonies. The Second Amendment, like every other amendment, it's about due process. It's that you don't have your rights violated unless there is due process of law. If you're a person who's committed 4 felonies and a court has lawfully ordered that you shouldn't have a gun and you're running around with a firearm, I don't have any problem with law enforcement saying you don't get to have that firearm that is illegally possessed, illegally obtained. I think that's basic law and order. Now, again, if you had somebody come in and say, well, we don't think that person should have a firearm, but they haven't violated any law, that's a totally separate question. That's not what we're focused on. What we're focused on is violent crime and people who have violated, the bodily autonomy of another human people. A person who has committed an act of violence against one of their fellow citizens, we're going to clean up the streets, get those people off the streets, and make America safe for the American citizens again. That is our entire law and order policy, and I think we're doing a pretty good job at it. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm a Christian man, and I'm just confused why that there's this notion that we might have owe Israel something, or that they're our greatest ally, or that we have to support this multi-hundred-billion-dollar foreign aid package to Israel to cover this, to quote Charlie Kirk, ethnic cleansing in Gaza. I'm just confused at why this idea has come around, considering the fact that not only does their religion not agree with ours, but also openly supports the prosecution of ours.
Yeah, so Let me say a few things about this. First of all, when the President of the United States says America first, that means that he pursues the interests of Americans first. That is our entire foreign policy. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to have alliances, that you're not going to work with other countries from time to time. And that is what the President believes, is that Israel, sometimes they have similar interests to the United States, and we're going to work with them in that case. Sometimes they don't have similar interests to the United States. And this example, the most recent Gaza peace plan that all of us have been working on very hard for the past few weeks, the President of the United States could only get that peace deal done by actually being willing to apply leverage to the state of Israel. So when people say that Israel is somehow manipulating or controlling the President of the United States, they're not controlling this President of the United States, which is one of the reasons why we'd be able to have some of the success that we've had in the Middle East. Now, you ask about, sort of Jews disagreeing with Christians on certain religious ideas. Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the realities is that Jews do not believe that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. Obviously, Christians do believe that. There are some significant theological disagreements between Christians and Jews. My attitude is, let's have those conversations. Let's have those disagreements when we have them. But if there are shared areas of interest, we ought to be willing to do that too. For example, one thing I really, really care about is the preservation of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Christians believe that that is the site where Jesus Christ was crucified, and also that his tomb is right there as well. My attitude is, if we can work with our friends in Israel to make sure that Christians have safe access to that site, that's an obvious area of common interest. I am fine with that. What I'm not okay with is any country coming before the interests of American citizens, and it is important for all of us, assuming we're American citizens, to put the interest of our own country first. That's what we're going to do. That's what we try to do every single day, I promise you. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Vice President. I'm the president of our pro-life organization here at Ole Miss, Rebels for Life. And I myself, as the president, am 100% pro-life. And I know you've stated, you being Catholic, that in the past you've stated that you're 100% pro-life. But since joining the presidential campaign as the VP, you've kind of wavered how you see abortion. So I'm just wondering what your stance is right now.
Sure. And
do you think that someone else's right to liberty trumps someone else's right to life?
Well, first of all, I appreciate your question, and I appreciate the work that you do. You asked the question, do I think somebody else's right to liberty trumps somebody else's right to life? No, I do not. I, in fact, do not believe that. Now, you said, and I'm going to take issue with something you said, just the premise of the question, which is that I've wavered on the pro-life issue. I really do believe that the president has been the most pro-life president in the history of the United States of America. Now, that said, there are two things that I think we have to keep in mind here. Now, one is the very, very hard question of, when we talk about our abortion policy, there are some very, very difficult edge cases. There are cases where you've got, an 11-year-old girl who was raped, who it would be unsafe for her to bring the baby to term. You've got situations where, bringing a baby to term would cause serious bodily harm, maybe death for the mother. That's one of the reasons why we believe in the exception in these cases where you have, again, they're edge cases, they're rare. I think the pro-abortion community would have you believe that's 90% of abortions. That's not true. But we've got to be honest about the fact that there are some edge cases. The second thing I'd say about this is that we have to be prudential and practical in what can get accomplished. And there may be disagreements about what exactly that is, but if you look at the pro-life victories that the President of the United States has been able to achieve, he's been able to achieve them because he has worked within the system that we have. If your attitude is you are going to pursue the most aggressive pro-life option, even if it means you lose every election and every outcome means that you're going to be in a situation where the Democrats have abortion on demand up to the moment of birth to the very end. You've got to work within the political constraints that we have. Now, here let me just say something about this. And somebody asked me earlier about my Christian values. And one of the points I made is that when the settlers came to the New World, they found a very widespread child sacrifice. I imagine there are some people who don't agree with my view on the pro-life issue. Let me just make an observation. If you go to historical archaeological sites where there were brothels, and the two oldest businesses in the world are gambling and prostitution, so there were brothels even in very ancient civilizations. If you go back to ancient brothels and you dig up the bones of the women who were working in these places, you will very often find a lot of children who were buried with them. And the answer is that whenever a society decides to discard innocent babies, they also don't treat their women very well. And whenever a society mistreats its women, it is very often the babies who come right after that. There is a reason why Christian civilization ended the practice of child sacrifice all over the world, and it's one of the great accomplishments of Christian civilization. I believe that we should try to be protecting every unborn life. There's a question of exactly how we do it, but I would never say that anyone's right to life should be sacrificed. Thank you, man.
First, I just have to say I'm thrilled to hear you articulate Christian values on a stage like this, and to remind us that things we take for granted and things we value so much have a Christian origin. So thank you for that. I really mean that. However,
so much of liberalism, by the way, so much of the far left is a sort of, if you really pay attention to it, it's a kind of perverted version of Christianity. Like, there's nothing wrong, of course, with focusing on people who are disenfranchised, for example. That's the focus of liberalism. But if you completely separate it from any religious duty, any civic virtue, then that can actually become, for example, an inducement to lawlessness. You can't just have compassion for the criminal, you also have to have justice too, which is why I think that a properly rooted Christian moral order is such an important part of the future of our country. But sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, amen, absolutely. Now, as much as I hope and pray that we can be a nation of Christians, the idea of a Christian nation scares me. So I'd like to hear your feedback on a pretty nuanced argument here, that perhaps there should be a wall of separation, as at least one of our founders advocated, between church and state at the national level. However, that line can and should get blurrier as we descend to the community level. And perhaps that is actually the system, the structure that our founders gave us when they said Congress shall make no law establishing a religious body. However, states did have close relationships with churches at that time.
Yeah.
Do you think that that is a rationale that works? Do you think that that is the way we should implement around these Christian values?
So this is a very nuanced point, and I want to just make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page here. So if you go back to the First Amendment, it doesn't say separation of church and state. It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. But if you go back to the founding time, there were actually a number of states that had formally recognized churches. So there was the Anglican Church of Virginia. That was the official state church of Virginia. Maryland at the time was the only majority Catholic colony, or at least had a significant Catholic representation of the original 13 colonies. There's a lot there. And yes, I do think that what happened is the Supreme Court interpreted Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion to effectively throw the church out of every public space at the federal, state, and local level. I think it was a terrible mistake, and we're still paying for the consequences of it today. But and I think this is your point, if you were to undo that, if you were to get back to a system actually meant by the founders where Congress is not setting up an established religion, but people in their local communities can kind of do whatever it is that they want to do, I think that would be a better system than what we have today. But I think the most important principle that we have got to remember is you do not have to completely kick God out of the public square, which is what we've done in modern America. It's not what the founders wanted. It's not good for the United States of America. And anybody who tells you it's required by the Constitution is lying to you. Thank you.
Hello, JD. How you doing today, man?
Good. How you doing?
In the wise words of Ricky Bobby, I don't know what to do with my hands.
Don't feel bad. Neither do I half the time, man.
Okay. First off, yeah, laugh it up. Okay, first off, I just want to say I am a huge supporter of the Trump administration. I was 3 months too late to vote for you guys, but if I could have, I would have. So I'm a huge supporter of you guys before I make my argument, but there is something you guys are doing that is kind of disturbing me a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. You guys have sent the military into Washington, D.C. and a few other cities that I can't think of off the top of my head, which, first off, they've had wonderful results. Like, no one can deny the results of that. It's wonderful. Some might even say the greatest. I'm a comedian.
I like this guy. Who is this guy?
Thank you, JD. I like you, too.
Now he's gonna ask the question about all the shit that we did wrong, but that's okay. Go ahead and ask your question.
But yeah, I'm just wondering, well, it's not necessarily something you did wrong, but it's what could someone else do wrong? Let's say we get a complete tyrant in office, and let's say Turning Point USA is having a huge protest against, something really bad that we don't like, and let's say he's, a president is saying that it's getting violent. How can we, I'm trying to think, my mind's kind of blank. What is the difference between what you're doing and how could we prevent someone from abusing that power?
Yeah, so look, I understand where the question is coming from, and I think it's a fair question. And it's going to sound like I'm being sarcastic, and it really is not meant in any offense. But when you talk about what could another administration do, to take a wild, hypothetical example totally off the top of my head, what if Joe Biden sent the Federal Bureau of Investigation to start arresting his political opponents? Okay? So here's something that I want every conservative to remember. It's an important part of my entire political philosophy is we cannot be afraid to do something because the left might do it in the future. The left is already going to do it regardless of whether we do it. That is the takeaway of the last 40 years. And in particular, if you look at what we're doing, if Joe Biden wanted to deploy the National Guard to a red state in a place where the murder rate was twice what it is in third world countries to actually go after murderers, that would be a great use of the National Guard. Unfortunately, I don't think Joe Biden would use it like that. What I'm worried about, frankly, is what the far left already did with American law enforcement, and that is the thing that we have to prevent against. And the answer to that question is you make sure the people who did it face penalties for using the federal power against American citizens. And by the way, that's exactly what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, JD. Honor to meet you, man.
Good to meet you too, man.
This will be the last question.
Ricky Bobby, 2048. That's who I'm voting for. This is the last. Oh, wow. We've been here over an hour. That's amazing. Okay, I'm sorry. Those of you who didn't get to answer a question, I tried to be as quick as I could. Go ahead.
Mr. Vice President, I'm humbled and honored to be here. Recently, President Trump endorsed a candidate to run against Republican Representative Thomas Massie, who has opposed and criticized some of the Trump administration's aims. How would you address those who fear that principled disagreement or independent thinking is discouraged within the party because of how it can be framed as a betrayal instead of as internal accountability or an opportunity for debate and negotiation?
So it's a very good question. And let me say this one is hard for me. And the reason it's hard for me is because Thomas Massie and he's one of the first people that ever reached out to me about my book or about political office. I've known Thomas Massie well before I ever got involved in politics. Thomas's wife died maybe it was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. It was a little while ago. She died very unexpectedly, was a very sweet and kind woman, and I was probably one of the first people that called Thomas to offer my condolences. I think the problem with Thomas, and I've told him this in private, and now I guess I'll say it in public, is it's one thing to disagree with the party on a particular issue. It's one thing to have your independent stand on a number of questions. And by the way, some of the stuff where Thomas Massie has been independent against the Republican Party, I've agreed with him with. Thomas and I worked together during 2023 where I was trying to stop the limitless flow of American money to Ukraine, and Thomas was one of the people I was working closest with it. But that's one thing. Being independent, having your own opinions is one thing. Voting against the party on every single issue, you're eventually going to make too many enemies. And that is the problem that Thomas has had. It's not one issue. It's not 3 or 4 issues. It's that every time that we've needed Thomas for a vote, he has been completely unwilling to provide it. That is why the President of the United States has trained his ire on Thomas Massie. It's because we can never count on him for some of the most difficult votes. I wish that that weren't the case. I say that as somebody who's known Thomas well before I got into politics, but politics is politics, and when you always vote against the party, you can't expect the party to actually back you. That's the reality. So, let me say just a couple of final things before I hit the road here. And one, it has been such an amazing honor to be with all of you this evening. I want to say 2 things. I want to say 2 things. Number one, when I was back in my agnostic days and I was thinking about returning to my faith, I remember talking to a friend of mine and actually talking about, a number of things. And he said something to me that was really interesting. And I was talking about all the things that were going wrong. I was looking to the future. I was talking about everything that was broken in the world. And I said to him, things are just really, really dark. And he said, and he stopped me in my tracks, he said, JD, you're right. There are a lot of things that are really dark out there, but despair is a sin. Now, I know not all of you are Christians, but for the Christians out there, I think that it is very important to remember that despair is actually a sin. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to criticize. It's okay to think that things aren't going well with a particular issue, but we are called to never give up hope. But I think one of the critical lessons of Charlie Kirk's life to his dying breath, this was a man who never lost hope in his Creator and never lost hope in the United States of America. So let's remember that and carry that forward as a way to remember. And the second thing that I want to say is, in line with despair being a sin, look, I imagine that I can tell most of you apparently agree with a lot of what I said. I'm sure that a lot of you disagree with some of the things that I've said. That's okay. We don't need in our political movement people who agree with us on every single issue. We got a couple of questions about Israel. We got a couple of questions about the National Guard deployments. We don't need somebody who agrees with us on every single question or every single issue. What we need is people of good faith who love the United States of America and are willing to work hard to save it. So when you look at all the accomplishments, you look at the accomplishments of the last 9 months. We inherited the worst border crisis in the history of the United States of America. We shut down the border, and net immigration is 2.5 million lower today than it was in 9 months. That means the total number of people that have been sent out of this country is 2.5 million. We have 2.5 million fewer illegal immigrants than we had. That's a great accomplishment. We inherited a terrible affordability crisis from Joe Biden, and I'm not going to tell you everything's perfect because it was a real bad situation that we inherited, but inflation is consistently below economists' expectations, and we're chipping away at it every single day. We inherited an economy where we had the largest trade deficit in the history of the United States of America. In 9 months, Donald Trump's tariff policies have cut the American trade deficit by over half. That means we're making more of our own stuff, and we're actually employing American workers to do it. And all that is to say that very often Charlie Kirk would call me and he would say, not attaboy, but he would say, do more, do more, do more. And I listened to Charlie because he was a dear friend and because I knew that he loved this country. My point is, the best way in your life to honor Charlie Kirk's legacy, it's not to despair, but to hope in the future of this country. If you disagree with something, then get involved in the movement to save this country. If you think that we could be doing more, then pick up the phone and get involved in the effort to change our minds and change the future of the United States of America in the process. My friends, the rebels of Ole Miss, despair is a sin. Do not give in to despair. Let's keep fighting to save the United States of America. Thank you, and God bless you.